If you're like me, right, okay. Just to let you know, we're recording. I didn't know we were doing that. So hopefully we've got your agreement to perform, to record. Thank you, Mark. So please, if you're not speaking, could you turn off your camera, please, and mute your mics so that all we get to do is look at Mark's lovely face and his slides. There will be time for questions at the end, so please don't use the chat function to put questions. We'll just do old-fashioned putting your hands up when Mark has finished, if there are any questions. So over to you, Mark.
Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to your Christmas warm-up. I can't see you because you've switched the cameras off, but I'm picturing you all at home proudly wearing your festive sweaters in front of a roaring fire with a plate of mince pies and something warming in a glass. So if you can just sit back, and over the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to try and whiz you through a very short history of the great British tradition of the Christmas pantomime, with particular reference to the important productions at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane and the London Palladium over the years. If I tell you that in the last 7 days, I've already managed 4 visits to pantomimes this year, you'll understand that I'm one of those many people who love to cheer the heroes and boo the villains, and generally ooh and ah as required. But I was rather late to the party. I wasn't one of the lucky ones who ever got taken to pantomime as a young child, but for many people, the panto's their first experience of live theatre, and a good show, an enjoyable experience, can give them an appetite for theatrical fare for the rest of their lives. As family entertainment, therefore, pantomime is one of the few opportunities where multiple generations of one clan can attend together. And this makes them as a production financially very important for producing theatres all over the country, as the income generated over a short festive run often subsidises the venue through leaner times for the rest of the year. So, how did it come to be such an important part of the British theatre industry without ever really taking hold in any other part of the world? The word pantomime derives from Greek and Roman sources, with panto meaning all and mimos meaning actor playing all roles to tell a story, which is rather a long translation for a 5-letter word, but then classical languages are complicated. This is a statue of a Roman pantomime performer, and Roman pantomimes involved a solo performer dancing to tell the tale of a myth or legend to musical accompaniment, so very far removed from what we know as pantomime. Fortunately, as time went on, the influence of other forms of performances were adopted, expanding the nature of the shows. Ballet, opera, court masks and mummers plays all played their part. But the greatest influence was the Italian commedia dell'arte. And if any of you are unsure what commedia was or is, if you've ever watched a Punch and Judy show, or seen Shakespeare's Comedy of Errors, or Goldoni's A Servant of Two Masters, or even Richard Bean's more recent update of that play, One Man, Two Governors, then you have effectively watched a commedia show. Commedia told stories of the stock characters, a miserly old cuckold, a braggart soldier, young lovers, a clever servant, and it used physical theatre, slapstick, music and dance to tell stories with a moral. In most of them, the servants usually came out on top. These easily recognisable characters were adopted in early English theatre, and by the 18th century had developed into the harlequinade, which was the curtain raiser or epilogue to all performances. In these brief light entertainments, Harlequin or Arlecchino became both the central comedy character and the love interest, with his paramour Columbine, her ridiculous father Pantaloon, and his comic servants Pierrot and Clown. This image is actually from a late 19th century production, but it gives you a good idea of the characters and their traditional costumes, because the harlequinade hardly changed in format for 150 years. And this is where Drury Lane's involvement in the development of our traditional panto began. Some sources say that the first ever proper pantomime performed in England was presented by Drury Lane's dancing master John Weaver and called Tavern Bilkers, with later productions titled The Loves of Mars and Venus and Perseus and Andromeda. So popular were these performances at Drury Lane that John Rich had to up his game at the rival legitimate theatre in Lincoln's Inn Fields, and it was he who actually introduced Harlequin to the British public. Soon, almost every public performance featured a Harlequinade. Rich's profits enabled him to build his new theatre in Covent Garden, which eventually became the current Royal Opera House. This is a playbill from 1776, and it shows you how theatre performances consisted of more than one drama in one evening. And here at the very bottom, you can see that there's an afterpiece detailing dancing by Mr. Slingsby and Signor Fauci. That was actually the Harlequinade. The early Harlequinade pantomimes were all dumb shows, but as one of the two patent theatres allowing legitimate drama, David Garrick at Drury Lane was able to add spoken word, thus adding a whole new dimension to the entertainment. Other theatres could not do so until licensing laws changed in 1843. As he did in other productions, Garrick also introduced spectacular scenery, elaborate effects and costumes, even providing greater topicality to the presentations with references to major events and personalities. It was Garrick who also first presented pantomimes based around the English legends of Dick Whittington and Robin Hood. By the early 19th century, in attempts to increase the accessibility of the performances, the classical stories became supplanted by folk tales, European fairy tales, and nursery rhymes, things which everybody was aware of. So popular were these that they expanded, and rather than subsidiary entertainments, became the main attraction of the evening. At the Lane, this was the time of the famous clown Joseph Grimaldi, whose physical performance style enervated crowds so much that the whole nature of the production shifted towards the clown's comedy, and Harlequin morphed into the romantic lead. As the years went on, fairy tale elements were developed, and ever more spectacular productions were mounted around the Christmas and Easter celebrations. The stories were scripted more heavily, and they were generally written in rhyming couplets completely. And that's no mean feat when by the end of the 19th century, some pantomimes were as long as 5 hours. There was also greater emphasis on the verbal wordplay and outrageous puns, just as we hear in our pantomimes today. When Augustus Harris took over as manager at Theatre Royal Drury Lane, he realised the importance of the festive productions, not only in helping the financing of his spectacular melodramas during the rest of the year, but also in building the profile of the theatre and enhancing its reputation. With its huge stage and extensive workshop facilities, he could produce bigger and better shows than anyone else. This cross-section drawing, originally published in the Illustrated London News, clearly shows the workshops at the back, that's on the left-hand side of the screen, where the cloths were all painted. And you can also see on the stage how lifts were used to move scenery in this picture. This engraving shows the fly floor during a performance. Lots of huge scene changes taking place. And there you can see some dancers waiting to actually be flown onto the stage. This programme shows the importance that was given to those designers who created the sets and costumes. Here you can see how they've got prominent billing for their various crafts. And these images from Jack and the Beanstalk give an idea of the scale that could be achieved, building sets out of cloth, stick and canvas. There's obviously the giant's garden here with him about to walk in to his castle. And here is the giant on a painted cloth after he's fallen down the beanstalk. Harris could then sell these productions on in later years to other theatres to add even more to the Lane's coffers. So here you can see that as well as his Cinderella at the Lane, he has a production of Bluebeard happening at Crystal Palace. Harris himself also managed the Time Theatre in Newcastle, and the Alexandra Palace Theatre's first panto came direct from the Lane. Harris also initiated celebrity casting that we're so used to today, since in an attempt to make sure his productions appealed to all stratas of society, he cast the most popular music hall comedians of the day in comedy roles. Here is the Book of Words, a big income stream for theatres in selling the scripts for the pantomime as a souvenir. This is the book of words for Humpty Dumpty, and you can see very clearly how a major selling point for the production is the presence of Mari Lloyd. Dan Leno, oh, I seem to have seized up here. There we go. Dan Leno is probably the most famous of all these music hall names, who after his first appearance at Drury Lane played a wicked aunt in Babes in the Wood, and then played 14 consecutive seasons. He's best remembered as a pantomime dame. Mother Goose, as we know it, with the Journey to the Fountain of Youth, was created for him. He also played Idle Jack and male roles, and here on the right, he's pictured with his longtime partner, Herbert Campbell. Most of the traditions, routines and conventions that we recognise in modern pantomimes were established in the Victorian and Edwardian pantomimes at Drury Lane. The idea of the principal boy being played by an actress, as pictured here, meant that in an age where fashions meant gentlemen never even saw a flash of ankle, when they went to the pantomime, they were allowed to legitimately take pleasure in the sight of full ladies' legs in tight breeches or shorts. Men had, of course, played women on stage since time immemorial, but putting low comedians in a frock meant far more risque material would pass the censor and appeal to the more raucous members of the audience in the cheap seats. Musical turns could also interrupt the action to interpolate their popular songs or specialities, just as the pop and television stars do today. Speciality acts were featured. The Acrobatics Volks family were at Drury Lane for many years, and here you can see the Pender troupe, who were renowned for their stilt walking tricks. Skin work was introduced with principal animal characters in all the productions. Horses, donkeys, camels, Dick Whittington's cat. The most famous exponent for skin work was an actor called Charles Lorry, who studied live animals closely at farms and zoos to make sure his performances were as realistic as possible. Whether that was a French poodle or a kangaroo, both of which he played at Drury Lane. Of course, Cinderella's coach was and should always be pulled by real ponies. Some of the stories presented at this time seem strange to modern audiences, especially the fairy tale of Bluebeard about a murderous husband, Bluebeard, sorry, about a murderous husband. And others are no longer deemed entirely respectable or politically correct. Sinbad the Sailor and Robinson Crusoe have fallen foul of modern thought processes. After Harris's death, Arthur Collins took over at Drury Lane, and during his 21 years of management, he continued to produce even more spectacular productions, employing the scenic designer Sensation Smith, among many others, to provide the scenes that he wanted to produce to send audiences away smiling. Here's the stage set for Cinderella prior to the transformation scene. And here are two castles scenes in a Sleeping Beauty. This is the arena where the fairies visit to actually grant wishes to Aurora at the beginning. And here we have the castle all overgrown and abandoned after everybody within it has been sent to sleep. The most popular stories regularly performed today up and down the country are Cinderella, Aladdin, Dick Whittington, Jack and the Beanstalk, Mother Goose, and Sleeping Beauty, all of which were also the Victorian stalwarts. The 20th century influence of Disney films has added Snow White and Beauty and the Beast to the modern roster, along with a couple of other titles. Publicity was just as important in the past as it is today, although they didn't really have what we call marketing departments. Prominent artists, though, were commissioned to design posters to spread the word about productions. And this is a poster by John Hassell, the artist who some of you might be more familiar with through his Skegness is So Bracing posters. This front cloth from a production of Babes in the Wood proves that product placement is nothing new either. The last run of a long pantomime at Drury Lane was as late as 1935, when Binny Hale starred in Emil Littler's production of Jack and the Beanstalk. By that time, Drury Lane's reputation was firmly based, though, on the large-scale spectacular musicals that it was now presenting, and thus its mantle as the home of London pantomime had been handed on. The London Palladium opened in 1910 as a music hall, and from the early years it made sense for the owners to present daytime performances at holiday times to bring in a young and family audience without affecting the standard 2-show-a-day music hall pattern. Wiley Tate were a company renowned for the ubiquity of their pantomime performances across the country, including at Drury Lane in the 20s and 30s. And as a management, they were more than happy to mount such shows on top of the Palladium's usual fare. This is the programme for the house that Jack built. In the 1930s, these matinee performances at the Palladium became filled with the regular return each year of J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan, and that was the actual play version rather than the modern pantomime travesties of Mr. Barrie's story. Although secondary to the Palladium's main variety programme, these attracted star casts, and one year it included Charles Laughton and Elsa Lanchester. It was after the Second World War, though, that the managing director saw the potential for boosting audiences and lightening the public mood through the magic of pantomime. Within a decade, the London Palladium was recognised as the home of Britain's most spectacular and star-studded productions, with shows that opened on Boxing Day and ran to Easter or beyond, with 2 shows a day and often 3 on Saturdays. Parnell's first production in 1948 was Cinderella, starring Evelyn Leigh, with Palladium favourite comedian Tommy Trinder as Buttons. He followed it the next year with Trinder again, starring in Puss in Boots. As you can see here, many productions of Cinderella have followed since. Val Parnell and his successors used the same tricks as their Victorian predecessors to appeal to mass audiences with spectacular scenery and star casting right through until the 1980s, with some of the same subject matters rolling around every few years. The traditions were mixed up, though, as fashions changed through the decades. In the 50s, The Wonderful Lamp and Turn Again Whittington starred Norman Wisdom in the lead roles rather than a female principal boy. And in the 1960s, Cliff Richard did the same in Aladdin. Tradition from that production, though, was maintained by Arthur Askey, as you can see here, appearing as Widow Twankey. Askey never tried to be effeminate when he was in a frock. It was very clear that he was a man in a dress and using his stock catchphrases and songs to entertain the audience. Cliff played Buttons in Cinderella as well, but the biggest attraction that year was Tanya, the adorable elephant, despite the fact that the Shadows had actually provided all the music and lyrics for the production as well and appeared with Cliff. They also wrote the score for this later production of Babes in the Wood, which was headlined by Frank Ifield. And you can see the star cast that approached him there. The last time Aladdin graced the stage at the Palladium was in 1978, when Danny LaRue wowed audiences with his glamorous take on Merry Widow Twankey. And here you can see the cast that included Alfred Marks as Abanazar, Wayne Sleep as the genie, and to one side there of Dilys Watling as Aladdin, you can see Wei Wei Wong, who's best known for appearing on The Golden Shot. The best writers of the time were always employed to provide the scripts and lyrics, including David Croft of Dad's Army fame and Spike Milligan and Eric Sykes. No expense was spared on scenery and costumes either. Early productions contained decor by people as important as Erte, and in the 1970s, Todd Kingman created all sorts of storybook settings, such as these. Here's a village with a castle on the hill. Here's Cinderella's castle. This is obviously the kitchen in which the ugly sisters tear up Cinderella's invitation, important in any production of Cinderella. And you can see how they use the cloths to create different effects. So here's a nighttime cloth. This is from Babes in the Wood. Yeah. And this last one, this is a front cloth that Todd designed again for a revival of Peter Pan, this time more of a pantomime version starring Ron Moody and Lulu in 1975. Tessa Wyatt there was Wendy, and that was straight from her success in Man About the House on television. You can also see the sort of directors that were employed at this time, as this is a Robert Helpman production. Helpman spelt wrong on the poster. Whoops. Little Old King Cole was specially written to suit the talents of comedian Charlie Drake and was a huge success. But 1963's The Man in the Moon, which was written to capitalize on public interest in the space race, was a complete disaster and resulted in a few subsequent years' productions losing many of the group bookers who supported the show's long runs. A bit of a disaster. Of course, the advance booking money in the box office was a great safety net for any variety seasons that actually didn't work for the theatre. Other star casting in productions included a production of, here we go again, Humpty Dumpty with Norman Evans, Norman Over the Garden Wall Evans, and the lead there. But look at the cast that you actually got if you bought your ticket for that thing. Peggy Mounts there, Gillian Lynn, very young Gillian Lynn, Terry Thomas before he went off to Hollywood, and Noel Gordon, long before anybody thought about Crossroads there. Humpty Dumpty returned later on, this time with star casting led by Harry Seacombe, and you can see how he's caricatured on the cover of the programme there. Humpty Dumpty not performed very often anymore. In fact, the last major production across the country and at London's Dominion Theatre was in the 80s and actually starred Keith Harris and Orville. Puss in Boots, another regular favourite at the Palladium. You can see here different designs across different years for the programme covers, and yet today hardly ever performed. In this production of Jack and the Beanstalk with Frankie Howard and Alfie Bass and pop star Mark Winter, you actually see that Dora Bryan took on the role of Dame rather than actually having a man in a frock. The same thing happened later in the 1980s in a production of Dick Whittington, when with her television success as in Are You Being Served, Molly Sugden took on the role of Dame in a production of Dick Whittington with Jim Davidson as Dick. Tommy Steele in 1961 starred in Dick Whittington opposite Eurovision star Mary Hopkins, and that production actually ran right through until the end of April, with 3 performances on most Saturdays, enormously successful. But this is quite interesting. You can see that these programs for Dick Whittington are about 12 years apart, and yet the publicity department at the theatre have actually just recycled the same logo. In 1958, Bruce Forsyth was cast as Muddles the Jester in Sleeping Beauty on the back of his immediate success hosting Sunday Night at the London Palladium. He received the same pay packet for each Sunday TV show as he did for the 12 performances a week in the Panto. The cast there was Charlie Drake and Edmund Hopkridge, you see. Bruce Forsyth actually shared the dressing room with Bernard Bresslaw, and it was a rather small dressing room, which he constantly complained about because obviously Bernard Bresslaw was a big man. Just as happened at Drury Lane, though, from the 1980s, long-running musicals took the Palladium Panto slot away, and only in 2016, after nearly 30 years, did pantomime return to its natural home. Cinderella was the first production in 2016 with its all-star cast that you can see here: Paul O'Grady, Julian Clary, Amanda Holden, Paul Zerdin and his puppet Sam, and in the back rows we've got Count Arthur Strong as well, Lee Mead as Prince Charming, Natasha J. Barnes, who'd just come over from Funny Girl, where she had actually taken over from Sheridan Smith, and they're right in the background, now a regular in the crew at the Palladium, Nigel Havers. With a little bit of luck, I should be able to play you a video. that was obviously a publicity video that was run in 2016 from the opening night of London Palladium. Now you can see there how easy it is to rewrite history, with Cliff Richard telling you that he was the first man ever to play Aladdin, even though, as I told you earlier on, 10 years before, Norman Wisdom had done so at the same venue. But there you go. People remember things differently. Since Cinderella, which opened then 2016, it was produced by Kudos Entertainment, who have now morphed, been taken over, and new company, Crossroads. But they actually have produced a production every year at the London Palladium again. And the productions are big and huge. Michael Harrison has led all of them. Here's Julian. He's here in that first production of Cinderella. This was his first entrance. If you actually visited this year's production, which is a sort of a highlights show, given all the COVID uncertainties, he repeats this song, which was actually to the tune of Downtown, but where he sings about the delights of being in Soho. The subsequent years have seen absolutely millions of pounds invested in new sets and costumes. Here was the second year was Dick Whittington produced. Elaine Page was the star billing for there, starring as Queen Rat. And each year with these productions, they can play over their 5 weeks to about 125,000 people. So you can imagine or see exactly what sort of a big business it is. The third year saw an enormous success, completely sold out before Christmas. Snow White, starring Dawn French as the Wicked Queen. Julian Clary, you can see as the Man in the Mirror. Charlie Stemp, who had actually just had great success starring in Half a Sixpence. We've got Strictly stars there, Danielle Hope, who had appeared in The Wizard of Oz for Andrew Lloyd Webber, and of course those regulars that keep returning, Paul Zerdin and Sam, Gary Wilmot as the Dame, and Nigel Havers. And here you can see all of them again in the publicity campaign that sort of ran for there. And the last big full production, circus-based, was Goldilocks, with Matt Baker performing high wire amongst other acrobatic tricks. And there's a bit of a close-up of Gary Wilmot as the Panto Dame through there. And that's just the marketing image for Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Last year, things were a bit different. We had no idea how long performances were actually going to be able to go on for or to last. So Michael Harrison came up with the concept of Pantoland at the London Palladium, which was sort of effectively a highlights show through there. That production last year only managed to do 6 performances before the government lockdown. And there was a Royal Gala, though, that raised money and played to key workers as a guest audience. So again, this year, with so few people having seen that and still more uncertainty, it seemed appropriate to actually continue that same idea. Obviously, Diversity, who were involved in last year's production, and Beverly Knight, have both got other commitments now. So they needed to come up with a slightly new format. And so this year's star casting is Donny Osmond. You don't get much bigger name than that. And the fans are lapping up his appearances at the Palladium at the moment, twice a day. Again, with the rest of the regular cast that you can see. The other 2 names on that poster, Jack Yarrow, who has actually been at the Palladium for 2 successive seasons now, playing Joseph in Michael Harrison's new production of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and Sophie Isaacs there, who was Goldilocks and has been in the 2 subsequent performances. That's running into January now at the London Palladium, and is as spectacular as any of the other shows that we've had. And this year, it even includes the Tiller Girls, although obviously not these Tiller Girls. There's some new young tiller girls working their way through. So if you fancy a bit of a pantomime fix, that's there at the Palladium again. Now, those big productions, of course, that we've actually worked our way through, Kudos up to now, and now Crossroads, who are managing pantomimes up and down the country. They are the biggest pantomime producer across the country. And investing in these huge productions at London Palladium gives them the opportunity to do exactly what the Victorians did, and actually then take those costumes and sets out to the regions afterwards in subsequent years. So this year, Goldilocks is at Birmingham, and that's billed directly as the London Palladium production, although of course it doesn't include any of the cast members that appeared in it in London. It's also the fact that at the Palladium, you can have a larger cast. So you might have 16 in your chorus. You create and invest those costumes for that first run for 16 people. Then you can divide them into 2 sets of 8 that can go off to 2 separate productions across the country. So you're actually making the best possible use of the money that you've invested in creating this production to actually make spectacular productions in the smaller theatres up and down the country. So really, the revival of Panto in the last 5 years at the London Palladium has been an enormous boost for the whole pantomime industry up and down the country, and has brought it a lot more attention. That was, of course, until COVID struck. So although there are pantomimes up and down the country or this year, there are problems. The regional theatres, some of them have not had any productions income for the best part of 18 months. So would be counting on this year's pantomime season to see them through next year. Unfortunately, up the country, many authorities, local authorities, have actually recommended that schools do not actually do trips to the local pantomime and all the rest of it. So the investment that's gone into this year's shows may not pay off for those venues. It's all a bit of a worry. But even with what's going on in the last couple of days, we've been told that anybody going to the theatres has to wear masks, but they've not actually stopped productions. So fingers crossed that that keeps going and that everybody's sort of sensible and can keep going. One of the productions that I've seen this week was actually the Richmond Panto. Again, quite spectacular, incorporated some of the costumes from the London Cinderella, spectacular sets, great performances from Anton Dubek and Rosie Ash, amongst others. A really young cast working really hard. Good fun, traditional entertainment. So it is all out there to be had. And most of it on the back of lessons that have been learnt from either those big Victorian pantomimes at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane, or from the more modern, spectacular productions with television and pop stars at the London Palladium. Here's a finale. This is the finale of Snow White there. You can tell that by the little people on the end. And that is about all, folks, for the moment. So if anybody has any questions, I was told that we had to be finished by 4 o'clock and that I should allow 15 minutes for questions. So I think we've got there. I hope I didn't speak too fast for you. I was rushing a little bit because I knew that we'd started late. But I hope we've taken everything in. But if people want to sort of raise their hands, I'm sure that John will be on hand to help me point out and listen to people if Brilliant. I can't see you.
Thank you, Mark. That's a fantastic trot through 2,000 years of Panto history. I didn't realise Panto had origins in Greek drama, so there you go. That's a new one on me. So if you want to ask a question, you can either use the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and press on raise hand, or if you want to do it the old-fashioned way, just raise your hand on the screen, and then when I say your name, if you unmute yourself and ask your question, then you can fire away. I saw Peter already. You had your hand up, Peter Lewis.
Sorry, I unmute myself. That was great. Thank you very much. I have an obscure question for you. How do you see the relationship between the great 1880s and 1890s pantomimes with the burlesques that were happening at places like the Gaiety?
Um, yeah. Well, the the gaiety sort of productions were probably livelier, far more musical, and actually lighter than actually what was going on in there. The one thing that I didn't touch upon in the on the detailing the 18th, 19th century pantomimes was that they could actually be really very, very political. So at times of things like the warfare going on, you would actually have, there's a very famous poster of a Jack and the Beanstalk at Drury Lane, where the poster is the giant laid out as in Gulliver fashion, where he's actually being tied down by the armed forces of the British country. So there, and they would actually involve, and the pantomimes, that they would actually have things like historical parades, and they could have military parades and things if there was a war going on somewhere and they wanted to actually use that as a bit of to get a message across to the audience, to be patriotic or all the rest of it. So actually in many ways, although they were in rhyming couplets and they had all these big spectacular sets and all the rest of it, the pantomimes were probably a bit meatier than the sort of gaiety musicals.
Thank you.
Does that answer?
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Great, thank you, Peter. Interesting question, thank you. Anybody else want to ask any questions? To say either raise your hand with your camera on or press the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. Just seeing if I can see any hands going up. I'm having to scroll between screens so I can see everybody. So keep your hand up if you want to ask a question so I don't miss you.
I've stopped my share, so that might make it easier.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Mark.
Sorry.
I can't see any other hands going. Oh, yes, I can. Liz Robertson.
Yeah,
Liz.
I'm just going to ask one question. When did the rhyming couplets end, Mark? Because I did some pantomimes as an amateur, you know, in my childhood, and we were still using rhyming couplets then, and they were great fun. It was another dimension to the pantomime that seems to have got lost now, which is a shame.
It sort of really got lost in the 70s, I think, when people, there were a lot more TV stars and things coming in and heading things up. And I think it actually became, the script sort of became far more comedy based in the way that people would expect them to have been in sitcoms and things. And they used to tie into the whole thing. I can remember Cinderella at the London Palladium as well in 1976, which was effectively Man About the House, because it was Richard O'Sullivan.
Yeah.
Fiona Fullerton was actually Cinderella. So, but then the Ugly Sisters were George and Mildred. So it was Brian Murphy and Eutha Joyce, straight from television. Derek Guyler was supposed to be Baron Hardup, but unfortunately died just beforehand. So they actually managed to get Richard Hearn, Mr. Pastry, out of retirement to sort of do that. But the power of television, even at that time, when it came around to doing the song sheet, it was actually Richard O'Sullivan leading the song sheet, but he was assisted, believe it or not, by the Honey Monster, who'd just been introduced to actually publicize Sugar Puffs. So everything became very focused on those key television tropes.
Which it still is.
And it still is, and it's. I mean, things like we've got the Churchill dog now appearing in pantos, haven't we, and all the rest of it. But I'm very pleased to say that Basil Brush has never gone away. Basil Brush is in Windsor this year. He's still here with us, leading pantos. So, but yeah, that's where it's went. The traditions were kept on for quite some time by the Players Theatre, who did a very traditional panto through into the early sort of 80s, but otherwise it's sort of largely gone now. Very often the villain or the fairy may actually still use rhyming couplets, particularly
I did rhyming couplets in Bristol a couple of years ago when I was a fairy.
Yeah, and particularly if you've got something, if you're doing a Mother Goose or a Puss in Boots where you've actually got a demon king, the Demon King usually sticks to that, but it's actually quite difficult for an Ebenezer who's coming out of a television sitcom or a pop career to actually get his personality and his jokes over using rhyming couplets all the way through.
Just realised that I've got the evil queen lighting behind me.
You still look beautiful to me.
It was actually fascinating stuff, Mark. Thank you so much. It really was. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Any other questions? Any more hands up? Diana, I can see your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mark. That was great. I just wanted to ask, can you give us a date for the last principal boy, or are they still out in the provinces?
No, they are still happening. You still do get principal boys. It's generally only really if you've got a pop star or whatever going in now. You do occasionally. I'm just trying to think. I don't get out to the regions as often as I used to, but there are still some of the young pop up and coming stars and everything who get to do principal. Nottingham certainly kept a principal boy going for a long time. So I think it's still there, and I think more so in what I didn't talk about at all, just because it sort of didn't fall under the remit, was the power of amateur performances for pantomime this year and how important they are to people. And most of those these days, you will still have your principal girl or principal boy thigh slapping, tights roll.
They're fun to do.
Yeah, unless of course they have a really attractive young man that they want to actually get in there to attract all the teenage girls who are so important for theatre audiences these days, as anybody who goes to see Heathers or Wicked or whatever Hamilton knows.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Diana. Anybody else got any questions? Skip Mort.
It was fascinating, Mark. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Likewise, I didn't realise that it had originated from the Romans. Just thinking about the provinces, I can remember going to the pantomime in the Grand Theatre, Wolverhampton, and seeing for a couple of years Jimmy Curry's Waterfalls. Have you heard of them at all? I've tried to trace them because I always found them so fascinating that they had this vast sort of Scottish scene with the waterfalls coming down and things crossing over and the lady girls pipers, masses of water, which they had to pump up to the tank, presumably up in the grid. But I've never been able to trace it at all.
I can't say that it's ringing any sort of immediate bells, but I've probably got them in programs and things anyway. But of course, that sort of effect was really big and important, and they did do that sort of thing in Victorian period. So you had sort of Bristol Hippodrome, the London Hippodrome, being circus based, were built with water tanks to create those sort of effects and the things that would go through. So the London Hippodrome, as part of their circuses, had elephants coming down slides into the water tank. And, So those big things there, and I must admit that as I sort of was seeing lots of pantomimes across the country, which was really sort of the 80s into the early 90s, that a lot of the sort of dancing water effects that you did see were really rather disappointing. You would actually get a sort of a few sprouts of water coming up from the back with a bit of a pink light through them. Okay, but they still would sort of go through. I mean, just as pyrotechnics are vitally important on most productions, that sort of effect when people come around to it. I'm sure that if I sort of pointed out to Michael Harrison that he hasn't done that in the last 6 years of the Palladium, that next year we might find that we've got dancing waters. I'll let him know that Liberace used to have them every time he appeared.
Oh, right. That's interesting.
And I'm sure they'll come up in sort of recreating a tradition.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Skip. We've got a poster in the Theatres Trust office of the London Hippodrome waterfall or flooding scene, and you can find footage online as well of that scene. It does exist. My colleague Tom can tell you where to find it if you want to find out. I think Jennifer, you had your hand up. Do you want to ask a question?
It wasn't so much a question, it was just a supplementary.
Okay.
Say that Curry's Dancing Waters was certainly alive and well in my younger years. They appeared not only in pantomime and over the winter, when they did still run, in spite of this being Scotland, but they also appeared in Variety over the summer.
Fantastic. Lovely to see you, Jennifer, after all these years as well.
Yeah, nice to see you too. Still here.
Yeah, fantastic. Good to hear it. Roger, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, hello. News of Curry's water effects. There's an existing company called Water Sculptures, who are the successor company to Curry's, and they have the various Curry's effects in their warehouse. And unfortunately, the man who really ran those effects has recently died, but his son is the holder of the franchise, and they, among other things, used to do the magic bathroom where you put the light switch on and the water spurting out of the bath and that kind of thing. They are very much still alive and kicking, available for bookings, I think is what you would say.
I suggest they get in touch with Michael Harrison then.
Yeah, well, I think they're around and they do a lot of water effects in the West End and things. When the Madame Butterfly at the Albert Hall, they deal with the flooding of the arena and that kind of thing. They're highly in demand for things aquatic. I mean, I remember that the Alexandra of Birmingham had built-in water tanks specifically because they always had a water effect in their pantomime. They were part of the build-up.
Brilliant. Thank you, Roger. Tom, my colleague Tom, has very kindly put the link into the chat for that video I mentioned at the Hippodrome. So if you want to click onto the chat at the bottom of your screen, you'll find that link. Oh, we've got a few questions queuing up now. So we've got Claire next, Claire Fox.
Hello.
Hello, Claire.
The Dancing Waters, the naughty stage managers used to put fairy liquid in it, which added great delight, I have to say.
We threw ping pong balls in one.
But my question is about dames, really. Is there a trend to be more and more drag queens? It seems to me some of the pantos I've seen, of course, drag queens have massive followings too. So any bright producer will be thinking of that.
I think that's expanded out from Ugly Sisters as well, yes. In that Ugly Sisters were more often taken by people who generally sort of did drag. And it's also in recent years, a lot of the pantomimes within their localities have sort of been reaching out more to the communities that are there. So within London, if we think of Hackney, Stratford and Hammersmith with their sort of production that have been there. And so their dames, not Hackney so much, but certainly Stratford and Hammersmith, their dames have tended to be a bit more drag queen in recent years. And that's, I think that's also partly because, of course, the older dames who actually handed the things down, the sort of people that you learned from and performing with them, you got the routines, you were given the techniques, and they just passed them on to you personally if they thought you were good enough to do them. Those people have gone now, so those things aren't being, your Jack Tripps and your Dougie Bing, they're not here now.
No.
And so a lot of those traditions have sort of tended to fade away a bit. And again, it's playing to modern sensibilities.
And the folder rolls, those were the days. Yeah. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Claire. Well, I'm afraid we've run out of time. Unlike Panto, we can't go on for 5 hours. Although I do have to tell a story about my very first job in theatre, working front of house at the Orchard in Kent. where Norman Wisdom was on stage, and we used to take bets on how long it would be before the curtain went down. They were quite long shows, but very good fun as well, as has today been. So thank you so much, Mark. A really fascinating tour,
Yeah.
really, really interesting. Really enjoyed it. Yes, it's going to be tricky this year for shows, but theatres have gone overboard in terms of absolutely making sure that they are safe places to go. So I would encourage you to get along to your local panto if you can. Our team are going to go to the Theatre Royal Stratford East next week to go and see Red Riding Hood, and we saw the Palladium panto a couple of years ago and thoroughly loved it. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for supporting us, all of you, and have a great Christmas and see you soon.
Thank you.
Happy Christmas, everyone.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Happy Christmas.
Yes, happy Christmas.
Bye-bye.
And you. Right, yeah, that's over. What do I do now to get out?